I think I'm on. Somebody type, yes, we can hear you in the chat. So I know that I'm being broadcast.
You're good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to LMEA. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that you're here. Let's get at this. I asked before we started if people could unmute themselves to ask a question, and we can't do that. So I'm talking into the void and you're listening into the void, but I'll try to check the chat often so that if there's a question that comes up or something that we can deal with that. And or at the end of the session, if you type questions into the chat, we can go back through them and try to answer some of them. So here we are. Here's the slides. Yes, I love the chat we're having about all of these promo videos that we're getting that has the stock music. Surely we can deal with some of the copyrights and get some band music. Like there's some pretty cool band music going on that could happen in the background, but that's just me and apparently quite a few of you in the chat. Anyway, my name's Cynthia Johnston Turner. I am Director of Bands and Professor of Music at the University of Georgia. Again, I'm delighted to be here with you, kind of, sort of, in our virtual environment. We are all Zombies at this point, right? Really kind of, getting better at this, a lot of us, but also pretty exhausted. I get that. I'll try to be as engaging as possible. I'll try to ask some questions and get you engaged. And hopefully I present today some ideas that challenge you, get you thinking. This whole pandemic, I mean, I was thinking about these things well before the pandemic, and now I am more and more convinced that the things that we need to do in our rehearsals have to change, at least in my rehearsals. So today it's the presentation is called Rehearsal, Ideas for Moving Rehearsals Beyond the Basics to Engage and Inspire Today's Student. We've all seen this meme. We could probably add this week to the very bottom, because we basically know that what we perform is just a fraction of the time, effort that we put into this thing that we do called rehearsal. And I have a whole presentation on the actual performance. It's called It's Not What We Do, It's How We Do It. But today is about everything underneath the surface. Today is about the process. And I repeat, I am now more and more convinced, and as this pandemic has taught me and many others, that process is at least as important as product, if not more important. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Again, feel free to type some, you guys are awesome. Yes, the clapping and the yes, woohoo, great. Okay, I love it. I love the feedback because, I'm just talking to myself at this point and looking at my own slides, which is kind of boring. Let's go to the next slide. That's me. I'll press this button. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why we rehearse. And so I want you to start thinking about that right now and start putting some things in the chat about why we rehearse. We're going to get to that after this slide. I'm going to ask the question, and we're going to ask the question of ourselves, is how we rehearse today still relevant in a rapidly changing world? We're going to talk about some basics of rehearsal technique, good rehearsal technique, that is. They're basic for me, they might be basic for some of you, but they might not be basics. We're all coming from different places and different experiences. So a quick review of some really great rehearsal technique that has worked for me and I've learned and stolen from others. And then finally, we'll get to beyond the basics to what I think are more engaging, more interesting, more important, more relevant ways to rehearse in the 21st century. Oh no, this was supposed to, oh dang it. So in PowerPoint, like these come in one at a time and it's sort of revealing. So now I have to read them. So you don't have to put anything in the chat now because it's all there, but you might have more things. So I'm gonna do what you're not supposed to do and read this slide. The question is, why do we rehearse? I ask because we spend normally an inordinate amount of time rehearsing. We ask our students to be in rehearsal for a long time. We are in rehearsal for a long time, if we're lucky. And we prepare, hopefully, for rehearsals for a long time. So I think occasionally, if not on a regular basis, we should ask ourselves, why the heck am I doing this? And why am I asking my students to do it? And I think the most obvious answer is what's on the top there in bold, and that is to prepare a performance, to get better, to improve. But I'd like us to think a little bit deeper about why we actually do the thing that we do. The performing, that's actually a fraction of what we do. The rehearsing, the teaching, that's what we do, and hopefully that's what we love the most. So how about, why do we rehearse? We rehearse to make mistakes. Research has proven that we learn a lot more from failure than success. Oh, Tim, am I too loud? Tim says, I hear you loud and clear. Am I too loud? Until someone says no. We can't have good performances without having good productive rehearsals. Right on, William Gleason. If I'm too loud, somebody just say, tone it down, and I will.
Sounds good. No worries.
Okay. Whoa, there. Awesome. Thank you. Yes, research has shown that we learn more from our failures than our successes. If you think back to our own lives, this is actually true. Not that we want our students to be failing on a constant basis, but do we make it a safe place to fail? I confess I did not when I was first starting out. The reason I did not is because I grew up in a band program that was fear-based, and you came to rehearsals prepared. And if you didn't come prepared, you were singled out, you were, or whatever. It was not good. We had one of the better bands in the country. This was in Canada, but yeah, it was all fear-based. And we don't teach like we've been taught to teach. We teach like we've been taught, because that's home. It's like alcoholics. You sometimes you hear stories of people growing up in an alcoholic family and they become alcoholics. You say that's counterintuitive. Well, it's home. It's what they know. And the same. Now I'm comparing band directors to alcoholics, which might not be far off. But what I'm trying to say is that we, at least for the first part of our careers, we teach like we've been taught. Hopefully, we've been taught well. But teaching evolves. And I hope to prove today that rehearsal should evolve. So we should be constantly learning about how we can evolve as teachers and rehearsers. I think it's very important that we understand that our rehearsals are about facilitating listening and deep listening, deep listening, and changing our perception of what we're listening to. I'm going to give you some ideas near the end of the presentation on how we can instill that love of deep listening in our rehearsals. But I put to you that very often we tell, and that does not facilitate good listening. We rehearse to learn how to follow and how to lead. More on that later. We rehearse to build a musical community and to facilitate magical experiences. Are we doing that in our rehearsals? And hopefully I give you some opportunities, some ideas to try that will facilitate more of those magical moments. We rehearse to develop musical independence. That's a big one for me. I don't think traditionally how I rehearsed and I was taught to rehearse actually developed musical independence in my students. I think, in fact, it developed musical dependence. More on that later. We rehearse to cultivate curiosity. How do we do that in our rehearsals? And we rehearse to co-create an environment of safety and the freedom to take risks and therefore to build trust. And now more than ever in a COVID world and in a post-COVID world, which is coming up, I think that trust and building community, the things that we've been missing so much, are all the more important. Are you with me still? Any questions in the chat or other ideas about why we rehearse that I'm not thinking of? No? Okay, I'm just going to keep going. I hope you're all still there. All right, please take a moment and read this quote. So this article, which came out in 2008, kind of blew my mind when I read it. And if you haven't read it, I strongly encourage you to do so. Randall Alsep and I actually are about to be published in a book. It's a conversation between a practitioner and a philosopher. And he wrote an article and I wrote an article, and then we wrote responses to our articles. And it turns out that he and I have a lot in common. And I think when we start thinking about student-driven, relevant experiences in our ensembles, that we have more in common with somebody who pushes our thinking about this than we don't. I'm going to tell you a very brief story. When I was at Cornell, and I was a Google Glass explorer. You might not know what Google Glass is, but essentially it was a wearable phone, a wearable computer. And I did a lot of research with it and embedded a metronome, and I had all these ideas, and that's a whole other topic. But we had a visit from some folks, or I had a visit from folks from Google, and they told this story, and I'm going to ask you to do the same. Close your eyes for a moment to give your eyes a rest from the screen or a screen, and imagine you are a person from the 19th century. And through the miracle of a time machine, the time machine plucks you up from wherever you are and places you down in the middle of Times Square in New York City. And you open your eyes and you're essentially blown away, right? Everything about what's around you would freak you out, right? The lights, the neon, the cars, the clothes, the colors, the diversity, the restaurants, the buildings, the noise, everything would be absolutely alarming. But you pluck that 19th century person and you put that person into a classroom, and they would know exactly where they were. The point of the story being that not much has, the look of our classrooms has not changed in a long, long time. And when these folks from Google told that story, I immediately thought about my rehearsal. If you plucked somebody from the Sousa band and you plunked him, because it would have been a him, in my rehearsal, he would know exactly where to sit and how to behave and what to do. He might wonder what all that percussion is doing in the room, but basically not much has changed in our rehearsals in a long, long time. We're going to talk about setup a little bit later. I also think that a lot of us still believe that just because someone is sitting in our ensembles playing an instrument, that they're engaged. They are engaged, of course they are, but I put to you that they're not as engaged as they could be. They're not as responsible for their own learning as they could be. This is one of my favorite quotes about education. Learning is a dynamic process that consists of making sense and meaning out of new information and connecting it to what is already known. To learn well and deeply, students need to be active participants in that process. And I repeat, just because they're playing an instrument or singing in our ensembles doesn't mean they're as active, as engaged as they could be. Steve Jobs, there's a quote that Steve Jobs said too about, he said, "Why?" People ask, how did you invent this whole Apple thing? I mean, how can you be so creative? And he kind of sloughed it off and he said, all creativity is connecting the dots. And if you think about that, the way we've set up education in general, at least where I teach, we have silos of learning, right? You go to this room to learn history, you go to this room to learn theory, you go to this room to come to the rehearsal. In high schools and middle schools, it's worse, right? You go to this room to learn math, you come over here to learn science, you go to your rehearsal. We're not creating enough opportunities for students to make connections. When we know that that's how they become more creative and that's how they become more actively engaged with the process. Okay, so as I promised, some basics. about good rehearsal technique. And I'll go through these fairly fast because, as I said in the beginning, these are basic tenets of good rehearsal, at least for me and probably a lot of you. So forgive me if I go too fast. And if you have questions about anything, again, put them in the chat. Number one, you need to know your score. And I'm going to make so many confessions to you, which is easy because I don't see any of you. I'm just confessing to my computer that I did not always know the score as well as I should have when I taught middle school and high school. Why? I was crazy busy. And now when I'm teaching at the University of Georgia, I'm still crazy busy. And we're all even crazier busy because we're learning all these new skill sets and Zoom and whatever this platform is, which is very cool. We get so busy with the stuff that, dare I say, doesn't matter, some of it, that we forget to actually fall in love with the repertoire that we've chosen, apparently very carefully, because apparently it's quality. A little bit more on that later. But we don't study it deeply enough to be prepared enough for our rehearsals. I was guilty of that. I confess I'm still guilty of that on occasion. I can't believe I told you that. But generally speaking, that's sort of the number one. You have to know the score. Macro, micro, macro means something that has worked really well for me forever and continues to work is to start big. Start with a big concept. This is just a general learning concept, right? Start with a big concept, narrow in on a detail or details, and then end with the big concept. Think about that with each piece or each portion of a piece. Think about that also with each rehearsal, that you're thinking macro, micro, macro, and also think it over the rehearsal time. It won't always happen that way, but try to think that way. Particularly at the end, that if you go into a lot of rehearsal detail, that you allow the students to make those connections right at the end of the rehearsal. Planning. This is almost as important as knowing the score. I don't know why I didn't know this. Maybe because of my high school background, but I didn't learn it in teacher education and band director education either, at least in Canada. I didn't learn it till I got to my master's program, then saw it again at Eastman. The rehearsal schedule went up for the week, or the rehearsal schedule went up even for the semester. This is a brilliant idea. I never did that. And I'm sure you all do, because you're here and you're learning and you're like, yeah, of course I let the students in on my plan. But just in case you don't, please start to do that. Let the students in on the secret of why you're planning, how you're planning, what you're planning, and most important, the why, but also when things are going to happen. It's whether you teach middle school, high school, university, or you're in a conservatory. It's just good manners and also great planning. And I by not doing it, there's a lot of reasons. There are a lot of bad sides to not doing it, but one of them is it perpetuates a power structure that I think needs to go away. That power structure being I, as the all-knowing band director, know everything, and my students know nothing, right? And I'm going to keep it that way. I'm going to hold the control. Anything in the chat? I'm saying all these controversial things. Feel free to put stuff in there. If you want to build community, and I hope that you do, avoid saying I and me in your rehearsals. A lot of the time we'll stop and we'll say, do that once for me, unless you make a mistake, and then that's a good time to say me. More on that later. But avoid things like I want or I need you to, and just change your vocabulary to we and us. It's just a small little thing that you can do that says we're all in this together. Yeah, less talk and more music making. You know this, if you remember this when you've played in ensemble, the longer that the conductor talked or the teacher talked, the more frustrated you got. So just remember that now that you're in front of a bunch of students. I got into the habit of, and I teach my grad students this, we are really good fixers. That's what we're trained to do, is to diagnose problems and fix them. This is part of the problem, in my opinion. Instead of stopping every single time you hear something go wrong, right? Try two things. First of all, figure out what will fix itself and what won't. That's something that comes over time. And that's something that happens when you build trust and learn about your ensemble and learn what will fix itself and what won't. And the second thing to practice is wait until you hear 2 or 3 or even 4 things before you stop. In other words, and how you can practice this, because my grad students say, how do you do that? How do you remember that the trumpets were flat at letter A? And how do you remember that the saxes were sharp? Big surprise at letters, or whatever the situation is. And how you can practice that, other than I've been doing this a long time, is Post-it notes. Post-it notes are your friend. I love Post-it notes. And you can just have a bunch of Post-it notes by your score. And when you hear something, you just take a Post-it note and stick it on the score. You keep going, right? You hear something else and stick a Post-it note on the score. If you've got different colors, even better, and stick another Post-it. Then stop, right? And then you've got these visual cues. Okay, you go back to letter A, boom, yes, there was this, letter B, boom, boom, boom. And then that will help, that trains your brain, trains you as a conductor to remember things that you would like to address without stopping every 5 minutes or worse, right? It's just, trust me, your students will love you for that. And on that topic, when you do stop, tell them why. That is a courtesy. You are building mutual respect. I don't know how many rehearsals I've seen where they've asked me to come in and just do, the yellow pad. And the conductor will stop and say something like, let's do that again from B. Or they'll stop and they'll say again. No, please don't do that. When you stop, say, we're stopping because, boom. Because if this was a live event and I asked by show of hands in your ensemble who likes to stop when they're running through a piece or playing a large section, who likes to stop? Nobody. Nobody likes to stop. So think very carefully and plan carefully when you stop, and have the courtesy to say why you are stopping when you do. Better yet, and we'll get to this, and hopefully over time your ensembles will get to them, you can ask them why you stopped. Why did we stop? And eventually, if you create a culture of reciprocity, right, of engaged learning, they'll say, and you've also taught them good feedback skills, because I've also stopped, say, in honor bands, right, why have we stopped? And the clarinet player, because the trumpets were too loud, or something like that. You have to also teach how to give good feedback and all that sort of stuff. But asking questions, asking them why is a very, very important question to ask, creates this reciprocity and respect. Expand your vocabulary and consider that how you say something is often as important as what you say. If you want to get somebody's attention, whisper. H. Bob Reynolds taught me that. We very often get in the habit, as I have gotten into the habit in this presentation, which is very me-centered, right? It's just the platform, that I haven't really changed my tone of voice. I've asked about it. I've asked if it's okay, because I want your opinion, but I haven't really changed the dynamic, nor have I changed the pitch. And the more that you do that kind of stuff in a rehearsal, the more they listen, right? It's like if your conducting looks all the same, right? The more habits you get into, the more habitual a gesture, the less meaning it has. So think about the tone of your voice, the pitch of your voice, the volume of your voice in a musical way, just like you would in a score. The other thing H. Bob taught me was he approached the podium in the character of the music that he was about to rehearse. So if it was O Magnum Mysterium, for instance, he would approach the podium very slowly and very quietly. Brilliant, right? This is stuff you learn in acting school, which I'll tell you a little bit later. I'm going to keep going. More basics. I used to say here, never count in an ensemble or a bar for nothing, until I found myself doing it on one occasion because we were rehearsing a jazz chart. So now I say rarely count. Again, folks ask me to come in and do the yellow paper of things that I see. And one of the things I see a lot are 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, along with conducting. Please, for the love of all things musical and good teaching, stop doing that. It is a hard habit to break. I get it, but there is so much wrong with it. You desensitize the students to your conducting so that they will ignore you even more. And it makes you responsible for pulse and not them. Third, how many of you, again, I'm not going to know, but how many of you wish you had 10 more minutes in rehearsal to get something done? That's how much time, depending on how many times you stop, you can waste with the bar for nothing, or worse, the 2 bars for nothing. And don't tell me middle school kids need it. They don't. I wish I had a middle school band right here. If you sensitize them to your ictus, to your breath, to having them take responsibility for pulse, asking them to give the tempo, you can educate them to take ownership. And man, they feel good when they figure that out. And you can tell them what you're doing. I'm not going to give you this bar for nothing because you can do this on your own. I know you can. I learned this from a string quartet masterclass that I went to, years ago. It's so great if you can get to masterclasses of great musicians that aren't your instrument or conductors. Go to string masterclasses, go to vocal pedagogy masterclasses, go to clarinet masterclasses, whatever. I'm just waiting for the snarky puppy masterclass. You learn so much about music versus band or the instrument or conducting. You learn about music. And at the Tokyo String Quartet masterclass I went to, I learned they did a masterclass with a piano trio. Not once during that hour masterclass did they say to the clarinet player, "You're flat." And he was. What they did was they found ways to address that, in that case, that particular technical issue musically. So they asked questions about balance and got them to work a little section a little bit more, and had the clarinet player and the piano player listen a little bit closer to each other. And when that happened, guess what got better, right? The intonation got better just because they were listening a little, well, piano player, he's always right, or she's always right. But the clarinet player was just listening a little bit more deeper, right? A little deeper, and to balance, not I'm flat or I'm sharp, but am I balanced to the piano? And the better the musician, the better the better that pitch will get. But even with younger players, you can ask questions that aren't like, "Hey Sally, you're sharp again," right? Or trumpets, you're too loud, right? All of the things that we get really good at saying. Can you come up with ways to get them to go, I didn't think of it that way, right? Trumpets, I'd really like you to listen to the flutes in this one section and see if you can hear them. Or let's say you have a balance, like an intonation issue in the saxophone section. Not like that ever happens. But instead of saying saxes, for God's sakes, tune yourselves, you can ask the first alto player, hey, Mary, are you playing louder or softer than John? And Mary might say, I don't know. I said, well, let's do it again and see if you just listen for that. And it's magic. The intonation, 9 times out of 10 will get better. Sometimes it doesn't work, right? You might have to, might have to say, pull out a little bit, but just try to think as musically as possible and treat your students with the utmost respect, almost as if they're professionals. Just start to go there. Be the best conductor, communicator you can be. Train your weaknesses. You're here. That's cool. You're here to learn new things. So you're already like, yeah, I'm a learner, right? I'm a lifelong learner. I don't know how many times, and now I'm actually missing this because it's not happening, walking down the halls of the Hodgson School of Music, and I hear some phenomenal playing, like amazing. What I'd really like to hear is mistakes, but it's human nature. We practice what we're good at. We practice what we're good at. It feels good. We don't practice what we're not good at. It doesn't feel good. Think about your greatest strength as a person. It's also your greatest weakness. Now think about your weakness as a conductor or a musician. Obviously, you don't have to share that, and I'm not interested. Actually, we don't want to share it. This is just for you, right? Are you training that weakness? Are you training pitch? Are you training rhythm? Are you going to conducting master classes? Are you training the way that you communicate with your ensemble? There's 9 times out of 10, also there's an app for that. You can train pitch. There's lots of pitch training apps out there that you can just download on the phone. And when you're, stuck on a bus or, in some boring master class, it's like, I'm going to work on my pitch. It's hard. It's hard, but we have to do it. Yeah, I think you all know this. Set high expectations and boundaries. These come from within you. And I'm just going to read what I wrote here. When you set boundaries, there is an expectation that they will be respected. This goes both ways. Agreed upon boundaries and expectation provides a layer of security and builds trust. Students make decisions based on how others expect them to perform. This is about a combination of compassion and rigor. Finally, have a sense of humor. I don't mean that you have to be Ellen DeGeneres. Yes, I've been told I look like her. Or some stand-up comedian when you're on the podium or every time you walk in the room, although sometimes it's helpful. It does mean that you need to be able to laugh at yourself. And for God's sakes, we take ourselves and band music very seriously, do we not? And there are times when we don't need to do that. Please put the students front and center in the music making, and just have a sense of lightness of being about it. Again, come from a place of empathy and compassion. It's okay. It's okay to laugh at yourself. It took me a long time to figure out that the students in my ensembles didn't want to sound bad. This comes back to my high school experience. It wasn't all bad, by the way. I'm not, traumatized by it, but it did screw up my teaching for a long time. I would say for the first 5 years, I didn't figure out that students didn't want to sound bad. You know what I'm saying? And no amount of my berating or making that student feel worse was going to help the situation. As soon as you realize that there's no student in your ensemble that deliberately wants to sound bad, it can change your perspective about how you treat mistakes or how you treat somebody who's trying and not succeeding yet. Okay, all the good stuff. Yeah, let's go. Now, again, these might be basics for some of you, but I don't see it a lot when I'm out there guest conducting and being invited into band rooms. So I'm gonna put it here. Conduct less. More and more in my career, the older I get, the more experienced I am, the less I'm conducting in rehearsal. And I've just said to you, get really good at this. That's important. In fact, actually, this isn't counterintuitive because when you are on the podium, it really matters what you do. We have to believe that what we do up there with our gesture, not with our voices so much, with our telling, but with our gesture matters. So yes, spend time learning different gestures that speak very powerfully. I mentioned that I took acting classes, and I did, and I somewhere in here I talk about that. But when you're not on the podium and not conducting and not worrying about what you look like, you hear better. You hear things that you wouldn't hear if you were on the box moving your arms around. You got to trust me on that, and maybe you already know. Walk around the ensemble. Say that you're going to run a big chunk or even an entire piece of the ensemble, and say you can do this on your own, right? Walk around the ensemble as it's happening. Watch the posture change as you walk around the ensemble. Listen to what you hear as you stand at the back of the room versus the front of the room. When you stand at the back of the room with the percussionists, you might have a little bit more empathy for the fact that they don't know how loud or soft to play. They can't hear a damn thing up there. It's really hard to figure that out. You'll see things on music stands that you maybe don't want to see, but there's just a lot of learning and listening that you can do by getting off the box and moving around the ensemble while they're playing, or even while you're talking. Incredibly important. Circle rehearsals, scatter rehearsals. These are, remember that 19th century Sousa person that we picked up and put into my rehearsal? What if he came into my rehearsal and the flutes were sitting at the back of the room? Or what if he came into my rehearsal and it was all like people were all over the place and the percussion were in the middle? I do that a lot for marches. That guy, the Sousa fan, like, what's going on? And I love that, right? I do these all the time, and I did them with middle school, high school. I've done them with professional ensembles. It doesn't matter. When my doctorates in performance come in and they see scatter on the whiteboard or on the screen above me, they go, yes, they love scattered rehearsals. And the rules are, if you're taking notes, you cannot sit in the row that you normally sit in, if you're still in rows. You cannot sit beside a like instrument, right? You can't sit beside, like two trombone players can't sit beside each other. And what's the third rule? I can't remember the third rule. When I do it with honor bands, they have to take a moment and introduce themselves because it builds community, right? But actually, this is another confession. This was my third or fourth rehearsal when I moved to University of Georgia. I did a scatter rehearsal, and it occurred to me that all the students didn't know each other. That might not be the case in your high school or middle school ensemble, but it was the case at the University of Georgia. I had sophomores sitting beside doctorates, right? And they didn't know each other's name. Duh. Take a few minutes and figure that out, right? Take 30 seconds and say something to the person beside you that you like to do besides music. Like, just get to know each other as humans, right? That builds community, it builds trust. Circle rehearsals, I do those a lot. As I said, particularly with marches, everybody's in a circle. You put the percussion in the middle. The percussionists feel like the cat's ass, as they should. And you get the ears to the rhythm section, right? And you say to the percussionist, you're running this, right? You're running this rehearsal. And again, you walk around the circle. It's amazing what you hear. These changes in how we set up our rehearsals, like the actual seating, the physical setup, can also change it immediately. If you're worried about how do I get more students engaged in my rehearsals, do this first, because immediately they change their perspective, and everything they've known is like, holy smoke, and they'll ask questions, and you can ask questions like, all right, we're in a scatter rehearsal. Ask the question, why are we doing this? It's amazing. They'll say, so that we can hear different things. And you go, awesome. So that I can hear the melody now, which I've never heard before, said the tuba player who's always sitting in the front row. Tuba players like to come to the front. You go, awesome. And just ask the questions and they'll give you I swear, if this happens and you go back and you don't get the right answers, I'll give you $50, I promise. They'll give you all the answers. And then you can say, what can't I do? in this situation. And you'll probably get, you can't cue a section, right? And I could cue the section, but I'd look like a British traffic cop, right? It would look ridiculous. So guess what? As soon as you mix up the seating like that, you are building musical independence because there's less cueing going on. How we doing? You doing okay? Somebody give me students fix their own mistakes without even knowing it, gives them responsibility. Tim, yes, amen, says BJ. Learning from other musicians and other instruments, genre. Oh, we're back at master classes. Awesome. Yeah, okay, we'll get to these later. If we were all together, I'd do an exercise. Let me tell you this exercise, and you can do it with your kids. Count to 4, right? And get the kids to clap on beat 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, clap, 2, 3, 4, clap, 2, 3, 4. Don't change it until they're all together. And you give them the challenge. Can we get this absolutely together, right? And then do this. 2, 3, and you do it with them. 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. And you ask the question, what happened to the quality of our silence when I stopped counting? There are tons of things that they can learn from those 3 beats of silence. And that's part of the, if not one of the most powerful things in music, right? Or it's the stuff in between the beats. The silence at those incredible moments that makes the music all the more powerful. When you conduct less and then you get on the podium, it makes your conducting more powerful. It's the what's that called in art when there's this space and then the negative space, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. I'm getting a little bit heady, but you hear what I'm saying. Monk rehearsals are silent rehearsals. These are really awkward, but the kids love it. Students walk in and they see monk, or if you don't want to put monk, you put silent. And there's absolutely no talking for 45 minutes or 2.5 hours, depending, whatever your class or rehearsal period is. Absolutely no talking. Again, you become a better conductor because you need to show more and talk less. The students become better listeners because they're not talking. And they understand the power of music, which is awesome. If you don't want to do a whole rehearsal period of silence, and it's not really silence, it's just no talking, you could just do like for 15 minutes, try it for 20 minutes, and ask the students, what was that like? Did you like that? Yeah, we liked when you didn't talk, right? Be authentic. This is good too. One other thing. If you don't have Elizabeth Green's book on conducting, I highly recommend that you get it. In the back of her, I can't remember the name of it right now, Elizabeth Green's book on conducting, somebody put it in the chat. You're all smarter than I am anyway. She does these things called psychological conducting. And I do these with my students every once in a while, and they absolutely love it. Psychological conducting is when I write down a rhythm, and as simple as possible. And I conduct what I have in front of me for the students who have no music. So my conducting has to be so compelling, so clear, dynamics, rhythm, basically dynamics and rhythm, rests, that they do exactly what is on the page without any music in front of them. It gets them really, really sensitized to you. It makes you a better conductor and a better actor. And when it's counterintuitive to say that authenticity comes from acting, but stick with me. Acting is authentic. Good acting is authentic. Think about some actors that you've seen over the course of your life and their careers that they basically play the same character over and over, and you know it's them. Versus somebody like, I'll pick Meryl Streep, who can change her authenticity by knowing the score, right? She has studied that script until it is internalized, and she becomes the character. She doesn't act the character, she becomes the character. And as conductors, we need to know that score until we become the music. So this psychological conducting exercise, again, that students love, will make you better conductors, and it'll make them your students more sensitized to you. And they love the idea. And take it a step further and ask them if any of them want to do it. They love it. When I was at Eastman, I got so nervous in front of the Eastman Wind Ensemble. It got to the point where I was going to take beta blockers. I was just a mess. I would be like dripping wet, and the first thing that goes when you're nervous are your ears. So it was just awful. Don Hunsberger took me aside and he said, "Cindy, just be yourself." He said, "I know you. You've this, whatever personality, and then you get in front of the Eastman Wind Ensemble, and you're some version of yourself." He had no idea what that, how that changed my life. Are you you when you're teaching? Are you your most vulnerable? Do you let them in? I could get real philosophical here. When I took acting lessons, I went through a whole series of training that basically got to my personality archetypes. And these are archetypes that we revert to we all have them, that we revert to when we're under stress. So, you can find this article on the internet. What's with the Russian Soldier is the article that changed my life as a conductor. I reverted back to this Russian Soldier, which is about discipline and athleticism and obeying the rules. He got to an archetype of the clown. He got to all these archetypes. And it completely changed my knowledge of self, and therefore helped me learn about myself better, which makes me a better teacher and a better conductor. Sing, sing, sing. This really is a basic, and I hope that you sing in your ensembles all the time. But I'm just putting it out there because we forget sometimes. Lots of students have hang-ups about intonation. And when you say something like, "Hey, can you tell the difference between feather and father?" And a kid will say, "Yeah, feather, father." And then you say, "You have great ears. Your ears are awesome." Get them singing in your ensemble when there's a pitch issue. Get them singing when there's a rhythm issue. Stop conducting when there's a rhythm issue. Conduct less, right? You take one thing away from one sense away, and the other senses are heightened. Another reason to stop conducting especially when there are issues. Sing, sing, sing. Get them singing chords. Get them comfortable with singing. If you don't do it, it's awkward at first. They won't want to do it at first. Some of them will, some of them won't. Get your ensemble comfortable with singing. Prove to them that if they can sing it, they can play it, because it's true. When you're sight reading, get them singing through something, maybe just the rhythm, right? Until they get comfortable trying to sing pitches. You sing too, and be okay with making mistakes. By the way, going back to knowing the score, when I have time, I'll sing through every line of the score. And when I make a mistake, I take my Post-it note and I put it where I made the mistake, whether it's a pitch mistake, a rhythm mistake, I missed a rest, or I missed the key change or time change. I'll put a Post-it note there, and I'll just write pitch or rhythm or whatever. And that will help me be more efficient in rehearsals. It helps me get to know the score also really, really well. Memorize, internalize. How's my time? When you're comfortable with a piece of music, ask the students who are comfortable to do so to turn the stands around. And you do a chunk of the music by memory. You don't have to say memory. You can say, "Have we internalized this yet?" Because memorization has some weird hang-ups for kids. You do it too. Turn your stand around and conduct without a score. And if they make a mistake, make it okay to make a mistake and ask them to keep going, because then they're going to do a little bit of improvising. And we're not doing enough of that in our ensembles either. Care and communicate. I'm going to speed up now because I think I only have 5 minutes. Hey, is my moderator here? Do I have only 5 minutes? Does anybody know? Well, anyway, I'm going to go faster. Care and communicate.
Yeah, I'm here. What's the question?
How much time do I have?
5 minutes or so.
This is a biggie, and I do this now all the time. Show your students that you lead from a place of compassion and empathy. I do this at the beginning of every semester. I sometimes forget. Every time I meet with a new group, I do this questionnaire. You can read it on your own, but you basically are saying, I care about you and I want to know more about you. Tell me 3 things you know about yourself. You find out amazing things. I found out I had a sailing instructor in my group once. Awesome. I could make analogies about wind. I found out several kids' parents are going through divorce, cancer, whatever. Go ahead and take a picture of that slide because I'm running out of time. You learn a lot about how learning should be assessed. It's very humbling, number 4. More. These are more ideas. Guide at the side versus sage the stage. Guide at the side. Ask a student to come forward. You conduct a little bit. You show that person, show the score to your guide at the side, and you ask that person to give feedback to the ensemble. What they're hearing on their end of the mouthpiece and what they hear at this end of the mouthpiece are 2 different things. I'm going really quickly now. Invest in student leadership. We do it on the field. Bring it into to our concert programming, right? If you've got section leaders, drum majors and stuff, invite them to do more leadership on the inside ensembles. Be comfortable with talking. You talk, it's modern, thank you, Trent, modern conductor. As long as they're talking about the music in my rehearsals, I don't care. They can talk all they want. Get student input into programming and rehearsals. We spend a lot of time figuring out amazing programs. Get some input from them. Some things I've done on this topic is I've sort of got what I think is a really artistic program put together, and then I have 3 pieces that would fit into that really well. And then I ask them to listen to those 3 pieces and then vote on the one that they want to add to the program. First of all, you get them listening to 3 other pieces, right? That's cool. 3 other pieces that you've deemed are worth listening to. And then you're also teaching them a little bit about democracy, right? It's problematic, but it's worth it, right? There's more ownership into that piece. It's people that wanted this piece, but they got this piece. These people have to convince these people, right? It's just a really fun thing to do, but also, meaningful. Record rehearsals. Yes, I'm convinced that my voice doesn't actually sound like this. Nobody likes doing it, but do it. Record your rehearsals and get used to being critical of yourself. And use online forums. So one of the fun things I did in high school also at Cornell was, hey kids, your rehearsal, your homework tonight is to not practice. And they go, what? Your homework tonight is to listen to today's rehearsal. I want you to listen to, this moment to this moment. Flutes, here's your homework. I want you to tell me about the trumpet's cohesiveness. Percussionists, I want you to address intonation from letter G to letter H, right? Percussionists don't think about that very often. Trumpet players, I want you to talk about the flute dynamic at blah, blah, blah. Like just get them to do a little portion of the rehearsal. Then that next rehearsal, you use all that information, right? Somebody said in the trumpet sections that they can't hear the flutes. So let's just rehearse that. Thank you for that information, right? You're getting them engaged in the rehearsal process. Finally, because I'm running out of time. Project the score. So this is a no-brainer for me now. When choral folks have all 4 parts, right, or 5, right? Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. We basically have that as well, with a few more complications. When I was the Google Glass Explorer, we embedded a score on glass, and then it was projected behind me on the screen. It turned out that this was not satisfactory for me, but what it did, this is what great research is. Well, that didn't work, but it led me to this, which is cool, to now always projecting the score. And I do it from an iPad. You could also do it with a, old school, what's that thing called with the projector that comes down? Whatever. Figure out a way that you can do it. There's lots of technology grants out there that you could set this up. In this particular picture, I'm rehearsing, is it Music for Prague or maybe Schwantner and the Mountains? I'm rehearsing from the score. Tyler Ehrlich, who teaches in Georgia now, is managing the iPad and zooming in and out. This lets the students in on the big secret, which is the score. It totally changes how you rehearse. It's more efficient, but more importantly, it's more engaging. And it says, I trust you. I trust you to look at all the information and make the same kind of decisions that I'm making. Yeah. The greatest gifts we can give our students are lifelong gifts. Years from now, they may not remember a chromatic fingering, a composer's name, a musical term, but they may remember how it felt to be in your rehearsal, how their opinions mattered, how they learned to take ownership and responsibility for their own learning, how you cared, how to work with others in a community, how hard work paid off, how to lead, how to follow, and so much more. Quality repertoire matters. That's a whole other clinic, how to recognize quality and how subjective that is. It matters a lot, but how you create a culture of vulnerability, of trust, of risk-taking, of emotional investment, community, and responsibility, those things might matter just as much, if not more. That's it. What's next? This is, my colleague Connie Frigo and I are offering our services to go into band rehearsals, honor band rehearsals or band camps and get kids to do deep listening and get artistically curious. So that's still on that slide. Are there any questions? Let me go way back to the top. I solemnly swear not to talk about the Saints. Yes, go go Dogs. Hello, good afternoon. We can't have good performances. Yes, right on, Tim. Student-driven learning is the number one thing they are looking for in teacher evaluations. Hell yes. And Tim, the other thing, and all of you, we don't address different learning styles like we should in most band rehearsals, right? And the thing about projecting the score, a large portion of your students, even though they're in band, are visual learners, right? Think about that. Think about how we are addressing different learning styles in our rehearsals. I'm reading this article now. It really makes you think. I don't know what article that was. I can't remember. Oh, the problem with band. I wrote my concepts of what I am teaching on a Google Doc and have it projected. Yeah. Awesome. Here's a question. Are there cultural differences to approaches to teaching wind bands in the US versus different parts of the world you've never considered before? Oh, absolutely. What happens in Canada and what happens in the US, very different. By the way, the majority of college band directors in Canada are women. That's not the same in the United States. I've done ensembles in Salzburg, Vienna, Spain, Costa Rica, Panama, Singapore, all different. And in a lot of Asian countries, the top-down model is preferred. It's going to take a while to break that mold, I think. But yeah, what a great question. Yes, lots of cultural differences. Very cool. Thanks. Gil, how do I say that? Please, students, if stopped a lot, would be way too worried about making mistakes. Yes. I also tell my students, think of one thing they personally can improve on the next rep and do it. Awesome, Tim. I do run-throughs of things, and then without any talking, I ask them to write down 3 things that they heard that they like to address. It's just another way to get them involved. On-man learning from, I like that, BJ. What did BJ say? Kids seem to relax when I am real with them. Yeah. Thanks for keeping me honest when a student let me know I'm wrong. Yes, you got to be okay with that. I like that, BJ. I tell my students I'm always be honest. Yep, right on. Friends never lie. Stranger Things, if you're into that. Bruce Lambert does all the time. He's working with bands. Yeah, good. He's cool. Do you mean Bruce Lambert? Bobby Lambert, maybe Tim? I don't know, Bruce Lambert. Thank you, Dr. Turner. You're welcome. Great click. Thank you. Okay, it doesn't look like there's anything else. Gil like the fish. Awesome. Okay, well, I think that's it. I'm done. Unless there are any more questions, or do I just sign off now, moderator?
I've got it.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks. That was awesome.
Okay. Bye, everybody.